Recording. All right, good morning. This is the table saw demonstration for this year. And just so you're aware, and this goes for everybody on this, earlier I gave everybody or some people the options. If you want to turn your camera on and take the, so you don't have to take notes, that's off the table. It is expected that everybody will take notes for the table saw demonstration, and you will submit those notes to me. If you do not submit your notes to me, I will not give you the access code to take the test. The reason behind this is that I need to know for a fact that you actually watched the demonstration. Just so you're aware, I will give you the reading assignment, the reading for the table saw, but you are not to take notes off of the reading. You're to take notes off of the video and what we're doing, okay? That's important. That proves to me that you watched this demonstration. Okay, table saw. Probably in most workshops, this is the workhorse. This is the machine that people go to cut stuff. It's used to cut straight material, okay? So, and I'll go into that a little more in depth, but I'm gonna talk to you about the parts of the machine. So, so this is obviously right here. This is the tabletop. This is the rip fence right here. And ripping wood goes with the grain. So if you have this piece of wood here, the grain runs this way. That is a rip cut, okay? And so it's important to know that. When you cut across the grain, that is a cross cut. And those are the two main types of cuts that you do on a table saw. There are other types of cuts that are far more advanced and all that stuff. Now, if any of you have a table saw at home, it is very important that you realize that my saws odds are way different than what your mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or aunt or uncle have at home, okay? This saw is a SawStop. This saw is designed to sense conductivity, okay? And there's many ways that you can get conductivity. You can get conductivity through water, through metal, and through flesh, okay? This machine knows when I am touching the blade. And what that does is when the machine is on, if a piece of flesh or something metal or wet gets in touch with it, it drops the blade down and it shoves a pawl into the blade and it will save fingers. And this saw has saved fingers in this shop. Okay, I had a young man that was in here a while ago who did trip this machine and he got away with just a Band-Aid. Now this machine will remove fingers, okay? This machine, I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm afraid of it. And so those of you that have come up to me in the shop before previously and you come up and talk to me, you probably noticed that I ignore you and I do that on purpose. And the reason why I ignore you on purpose is because I'm paying attention to where my fingers are at. There's an old saying and an old thing, you know, when someone, with us woodworker people, when we see, or someone comes and goes, oh yeah, I'm a woodworker, where's the first place I look? I look at the hands. And there are two machines that remove fingers, the table saw and the chop saw behind me back here. And I was in a college class for my master's degree, and this professor comes and goes, oh yeah, I'm a woodworker. And the first place I looked was his hand. And what did I see? I saw this. And I'm like going, whoa, 80%er. And he's like, what? And I go, you got 80% of your fingers left. Oh yeah. And I go, how'd you do that? He goes, chop saw. So any types of saws that use circular saw blades or anything, they scare me, okay? Now you have different types of saw blades, okay? Some saw blades have really small teeth, and some saw blades have medium-sized teeth, and some saw blades have really big teeth. Big teeth saw blades are generally reserved for rip cuts, in other words, cutting this way. So be aware of that. That's one you want to note, okay? Small tooth teeth are designed better for cutting across the grain of the wood, okay? And you can also get what's called a combination blade. And it's the one where the teeth are kind of in the middle. Those teeth are better designed for cutting multiple things. You can cut cross cut and you can cut rip cuts with it. Okay, so on this machine here, I've got I got a pretty small blade on it. I will be ripping some soft material with this blade, but normally we don't do that with this blade. Okay, and so I mean ripping, that means I'm going to be running it through this way. This is a piece of alder. It's extremely soft. So other parts of the machine. So this is the rib fence. This is the table insert, and these come out so you can get in and access the blade. And underneath the table inserts, where we have the pawl that comes in and kicks in and will drop the blade down and all that stuff, and it saves fingers. Back here we have the tape measuring device here on this, and on the fence we have a little like magnifying glass here on both sides so you can see how much you got it to measure with. So we also have with this machine is we can tilt the blade, and right here on this wheel here will allow us to cause the blade to tip. So this is the crank wheel to tip the blade, and it's angle adjustment. And you can't really see it right now, but on the back side over here, let me move this camera here for a moment, and I'll take you back and show you. Okay, you can see here that we have an angle gauge right here, and when I crank this over here, you'll see that it moves the wheel, and we can cut several different angles and all that stuff. And we have digital tools that I can put on the blade, and I can get this saw blade here to within a 1/10 of a degree, which is like really, really minute. So we can get very accurate cuts. Other things we have here, we have the on and off switch here, and this right here, this is a great design here. This is the on and off switch here. So yes, normally it runs, I usually I leave it on here, but you don't turn it on until you pull this out. So you have to physically lift it out, okay? And what's nice about this is that all you got to do is smack this with your knee, and then it'll shut off. So it's kind of a hands-free unit. It's really nice. Okay, I'm going to show you something here. Now, normally I don't raise the blade up this high, but I'm going to touch my finger on it here. So you see me touching it. And if you come down here and you look, you can see the red light blinking there. That's where it's conducting. It's sensing that, hey, I'm touching it. It knows it. And the minute I take my finger off of it, watch here, it'll stop. Bloop. Okay, it says, hey, it's free to go. Okay, now water and metal and all that stuff will affect this, so you have to be aware of that. So that's why I always tell you we don't want you to cut wet lumber on this machine. Now on the fence here, we have the locking lever, so you can slide things over and get accurate measurements and stuff like that. And when you do it, you lock it down. You push the handle down. We have other devices here too, which you guys have seen before. This is a miter gauge, and this goes in the miter gauge slot right here. And we can control the angles of this, so we can adjust this to any angle we want. And we can loosen it up and all that stuff. And I always like to flip it over and push it up, and then relock it in so it's accurate. Takes a little bit. It's hard to do this one-handed. It's kind of one of those things you need two hands to do. All right. So whenever cutting material on the table saw, there is absolutely no reason, and it's not safe, to expose this much of the blade above the material. You only want to expose the bare minimum. You're squeaking. You always will watch me set the material up, and I have that blade about 1/8 of an inch above the material, okay? And that is very important. And why that is important is if you are not paying attention, and I've actually seen it happen. I was in a cabinetry class at Bates years ago, and this guy was cutting some material on the table saw, and he wasn't paying attention to where his thumb was at. And as you can see where my thumb is at right now here, he ran it across the table saw like this. Now, he was very lucky. All he did was take a curve out of his thumb. So it took a straight line out of it. It was bloody mess. Okay. So this is part of the reason what I'm willing to bet is somebody distracted him when he was using the machine, and he ran his thumb right across it, and it took a chunk right out of it. He's lucky he didn't remove his whole thumb. Okay. Doesn't take much. It's quick. I've showed you guys pictures, and there was an individual, friend of mine, her husband wrestled with a table saw and lost. And I've showed you pictures of it. It's not a good process. It wasn't pretty at all. And it was far bloodier and far worse than anything else. Okay, so you always set it up to no more than 1/8 of an inch above the material. So that's higher than the material. Anything narrower than 6 inches, this is 6 inches here. This isn't much, is it? Okay. Anything narrower than 6 inches, you must use a push stick when you're cutting with the fence. The reason for that is it keeps your hands up and elevated and out of the way. And if you do get caught in here, that's a good thing. Now, because it keeps, I'd rather you hit this and cut this than this. Okay. So when you're pushing and you're cutting material, I always like to push into the fence. I don't want to push over here, because if I push over here, what will happen is you'll see that the material gets out like this, and it gets to an angle. And that's kind of scary. So I'm going to take this and get a little closer. Hopefully, let me see if you can see that. Yes, okay, good. All right. Okay, so I always like you to push into the fence. And the reason for that is if you push here, sometimes what'll happen is it'll walk out this way a little bit, and the front of the board will be over this way. And what happens is you'll get what's called a kickback. This machine will give kickbacks. I had a teacher when I was in high school, my woodshop teacher, Mr. Long, God bless him, he was a great man. And I remember him cutting a big piece of sheet plywood on the table saw. And I walked in and said good morning to him, and I looked at him, and he had this goose egg on the top of his head. What I mean by a goose egg is a big bruise, and it was like a contusion. It was sticking out. It was like, whoa, holy cow, Mr. Long, what happened? Oh, I got a kickback on the table saw. This thing here, if you bind the material between the blade and the fence, it will throw it out here with force. Hence, you never want to stand behind me when I'm using the table saw, or anybody else is using the table saw. As a matter of fact, before you start using the table saw, you should be looking around you. Hey, you need to move out of the way here. Please move. I don't want you to be in the line of a kickback. You also will also notice when I'm using the saw that I'm always off to the side. So the blade is either here or the blade is either here on my side. I am never right here, because if I end up getting a kickback, it's going to hit me in places that I don't want to get hit, and then you get to call me Minnie Mouse, and I don't want to get hit there. So you'll always notice that. Now, have I had kickbacks before? Yes, I have. They do happen, and they don't feel good. Okay, so you've got to be careful with them. Some other things about the saw, and there's many things. There's all sorts of different tools. You'll also see me using this crosscut sled. And it's a great, oh, this thing is awesome. I love this thing. And you've seen me use this a lot. And this is very, very accurate, and does a great job for crosscuts. And I can repeat cuts by setting up this little stop here. But I can also, I can crosscut anything, but I have to raise the blade up higher. So when I use the crosscut machine, I always, making sure I'm just 1/8 of an inch higher than the material. And I always prefer to have both hands on the crosscut sled. And I feed it into the machine, make the cut, and then use my knee to stop the blade, and then remove my material. And this will be a machine that you ever want to use it, if you've passed the test, you have to ask me. I will be glued to your side when you use this, because it's just that much can happen. Great machine, but a lot can happen if something, I don't want you to get hurt. These are my kids, and I care about you. Okay. On occasion, you will never, ever, ever, whenever you're going to cut material on a table saw, you need to have a straight edge. And so I'm talking about an edge that's nice and straight here or here. You never, if you got a rough edge that's not flat, we need to go over to the jointer. And that's going to be one of the machines I'm going to show you, probably the next one I'm going to show you how to use. And it's another machine that gives you this nice factory straight edge right on a board here, which is nice. Okay. So I will start with the crosscut first on this. But just so you're aware, you never, ever, ever take your material and have your rip fence here and then shove this all the way over here. Now, you may have seen me do a variation of that. But the reason why we don't do that is if this rubs up against here and you're feeding it in, what could happen is that the material will get binded between the blade and this fence here. And if it starts feeding into it, and then all of a sudden you've got a risk of a kickback. And it's a good chance you're going to see one. You'll always see me going, "Ah." Now, there are some tips that you can do to use this. So if you got like multiple pieces you want to cut up at certain lengths, then a lot of times what we do is we take a piece of material and we measure it. Okay. We measure it out, and I will get a piece of material, and I'll measure the thickness of this material, and I will clamp this to the fence here, and then I will add that thickness to the tape measure down here, and then I don't put it up in here, I put it back here. So what I'm doing is I'm sliding the material up to it, and so when I get ready to cut, now this is clamped to this fence, That's the important thing to remember. It's clamped. Okay. And what I do is I feed it in, and notice that it's coming off of the block here, and then it's being fed into the saw. Well, now I've got a space here, so I've eliminated the pinch point. Okay, that pinch point is the part that can give you the kickback. So I am going to go get a clamp, and I'm going to clamp this to this here, and then I'm going to show you that process. Okay, this is considered a special setup, so if we ever do this, I'm going to be here with you. Give me just a moment. I'm going to go grab a clamp. All right, here's a clamp. You'll notice I've always tried and keep my push stick nearby. All right. So now I come here. I'm going to blow this material out of here real quick. Get a broom. It's got a little sticking in there. I want to get this cleaned out good. There we go. All right. So got to make sure that this is up and underneath this little bar right here. You saw me lift that up. You definitely don't want to cut it like that. Okay. Oh, and by the way, whether ripping, which is using the rip fence, or cross-cutting using the sled, you never, ever, ever, this is the biggest no-no ever, you never freehand cut coming across. Because you can see how I'm moving the board here, and do you see it kind of doing this? It's coming there. If that binds, whoop, you're going to get it. Okay? So you got to be cautious of that. Okay? Never freehand. Never sit there and go, okay, yeah, I can do this. You're going to get a kickback, or you're going to cut your finger off. Okay? Always use a rip fence or the crosscut sled. All right. All right, so what I'm going to do is, I've checked to make sure everything is square set up on the crosscut sled here. I'm going to pull the red lever out, fire up the saw, and I may make a mark. Let's say, for instance, I want to cut right here. And if we look, I got a little mark right here, and we want to cut out this section right here, and here's my mark. I'm going to cut on this side of the blade. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this portion of the saw blade up with that line. Don't line it up in the middle. Now, you remember me talking to you about bandsaw and about kerfs on saw blades. This has a kerf too. You got a blade pointing this way and you got a blade pointing that way. And if you look at this blade's the same way. It's set up so that it relieves the pinch point on there. If the teeth were lined up, the chances of getting a kickback go up exponentially. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this. I'm going to go, okay, you know what? I got this blade right here. This tooth is facing that way. So I'm going to take this and I am going to line it up just like so. Now, I'm going to show you what I just did. Okay, so I'm looking at the saw blade here. This tooth right here, it's kind of angled up like that. That's the edge of the blade that I'm lining up right there. Okay. All right. Okay. So I've got it where I want it. I don't move the board. Slide back the table. Never start the material on the blade. Boom, kick back just like that if you do it. Okay. Turn the saw on. We don't, there's a fine line. We don't shove this through as hard as we can and as fast as we can. And we don't go too slow, because if you go too slow, you can burn the material. Okay? Let the saw do the work. Feed it in. Notice both of my hands are on the crosscut sled, away from the blade. Feed it in. Go all the way past. Use your knee to shut the blade. As you notice, I haven't taken my hands off yet. I have waited for the blade to stop. I'm now safe to do so. Okay? And I've cut off that piece of material. And I have a nice straight cut right here on the end. Okay? Now, let's say I wanted to cut multiple pieces. So I talked to you about setting up this block here to eliminate the pinch point between the blade and the rip fence. But let's say I want to cut several pieces of wood to this length here. I can use this. So for example, let's say I got this piece of MDF plywood right here. And I just slide it up there. Okay. I am not starting the blade on the machine. I'm turning it on. And wait for the machine to come to a complete stop. Remove the material. Slide the next one over. Oops, I should have held that out there in my laziness. Slide it back. Okay, I can do it again. Notice I am not directly behind the saw blade. Okay, I'm off to the side here. I'm not over here, I'm not over here, and I'm standing comfortably. Okay, all right. So that is doing a crosscut with a crosscut sled. You can do the same thing with the miter gauge. They usually tell you, hey, we want you to keep the miter gauge in between the fence and the other, but with the crosscut sled, it's a little different. Now I can take this crosscut sled and I can say, hey, you know what? I want to cut this board at 15 degrees. So I click this, I line this up here. And as you can see here, got a little knob there, and I got a little gauge, and I can look right in there, and I can get it where I want, and then it's nice and adjusted. Okay, and then I can make that cut. Now, those of you who were in the class, and now you have to be cautious of this, because now look where my saw is at. I don't know if you can see that, but my fence here is now cutting into, or my blade is cutting into this fence here. So I have to loosen this up, slide this out of the way. I slide it down, readjust, and I make sure I'm sliding past it. Yes, nothing is touching. Perfect. Now I can go and I can cut 15-degree angles all day until the cows come home. So here we go. Wait for it to stop. There's my 15-degree angle there, and my 15-degree angle there. Okay. and it does a nice, accurate job. As a matter of fact, if you were to rub your finger across this and push hard enough, it probably would cut you. I've been cut before. All right. So that is the miter sled. Like I said, you always have to have a nice straight edge on your material. You use the joiner to do that. Now, as I've told you earlier, I always like to keep my push stick near. I like push sticks. Push sticks are my friend. Okay. Whenever measuring, you always make sure the saw is off. Whenever you're adjusting the fence on the table saw, even if you see me do it, I don't want you to do that. I want you to shut the machine off and make the adjustment. Okay, so I'm going to take this here. Okay, this board is 4 3/4 inches. So I don't want to remove too much. So I'm going to go 4 5. Let's go 4 1/2. Now, on all the other tools, I tell you 4 inches away, right? For the rule of thumb. For this machine, it's 6 inches. And if you're within 6 inches, you got to use the push stick. Okay? All right. Now, I need to come back and readjust because look how high that blade is sitting up there. So if I was to rub my thumb across there, I would probably cut my whole thumb off. And that guy that ran the saw blade through his thumb still has his thumb. He just got a heck of a big scar on there. So I lower the blade down. It's 1/8 inch. Okay. All right. Turn the saw on. And notice where I'm standing. The board is here. I'm not here. I'm off to the side. Now, when you're feeding the material in, notice where my hand is at here. My hand's in the line of cut, isn't it? You got to be cautious of this. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to do this, okay? I'm not going to slide my hand along with it. Whenever I'm cutting something, I always remove my hand away if I can. So in this case here, I'm feeding it in. I'm not going to do this and come up like this with it because I could cut my thumb. So I'll plant my hand here and I'll use my hand to push it into the fence and I feed it into the saw. Notice I'm leaving my hand where it's at. Then after I can't hold my hand here, I'm not going to bring it into here, anywhere in here. I'm going to hold it right here. And then I'm going to come in with my push stick and I'm going to push. And then as soon as this board comes past my thumb here, I'm going to remove my hand from the table. That way, there's no chances of it getting anywhere within there. Okay? Pull it off, feed it in, use the push stick, and gently push. Let the saw do the work. Okay, now it's off the material. I take my hand, put it away, and I continue pushing out. And I drop the material off the table. Now, they have other setups where tables where we can catch it. There are times, and some of you may have helped me before cutting like sheet stock or like plywood. And I will have you come to the other side of the table over here, and I'll say, hey, support the material, okay? But it's support. You're not driving. You're not pulling off to the side or anything. All you're doing is holding it. There's other tools that we can use, and you'll often see me use this right here, this big feed wheel. And what I can do is I can set this up to the height of the table. And I got to make sure I always like to set it up so it's a little bit lower than it so that it actually drops down just a tad so that when I'm pushing stuff off, the table is the highest portion, not the roller. And then when it feeds off, it just drops and it rides on this. And then we're okay. And I just got to shut it off and kick it out. But if you are helping somebody and you take this board and you do this, then it's going to grab and it's going to throw it back at the person who's behind the table saw using it. So you always got to be cautious of that. All right. So that is the demonstration on the table saw. So again, the expectations are that you have taken good notes. I will post this up on Canvas for you to access, and you can utilize, go back and if you miss something, you can get those notes in and all that stuff. So great machine. I love it. I use it all the time. I am afraid of it. I respect it because of what it can do. Okay, and it will bite you if you're not careful. All right. Let me go ahead and stop this recording here, and then I'll answer any questions.